Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Gadoury, and I'm a plant pathologist at Cornell University. That's my day job. I'm also the internal communications officer for the American Phytopathological Society. I've been asked to put together a few brief presentations on professional skills. This is the first lecture in that series. For those of you who are in the early stages of your career, think of this as the first day of class. For those of you who might be farther along in your careers, you might consider how all of this applies to mentoring of early career professionals. But keep in mind, this is only advice on how to prepare. The actual preparation will take some time and a real commitment on your part. I'm quite pleased that I have finally arrived at that stage of my career where anybody might consider me as wise. So today, what I want to do is just pass on some knowledge acquired through long and sometimes painful experience. Not everything that worked for me will be applicable to you, but I have been quite careful in choosing my material to include things that are more or less timeless and would apply to just about any person. So let's get started. In the interest of full disclosure, I've had my share of bad ideas and have also suffered the consequences. I'd prefer not to relive those experiences. The focus today is going to be on those things that worked. But before I go so far as to give you my best advice on the necessary preparations that you'll need to make for success, it's worth a moment's pause to say exactly what I mean by success, at least in the context of a professional life. Now, the list shown here is not exhaustive, but I think the three things it contains are pretty important to most of us. They are also largely interdependent. First and foremost is recognition and respect. I know you didn't choose this profession to become rich, but I believe that most of us place a very high value on the perception that we are respected for who we are and what we do. This is largely an internal thing. It's how we feel, but it's driven by the externals of how others treat us, which is largely driven by how we act and how they perceive our actions. As I said, these are interdependent. So the first leads into the second. The next aspect of success is productivity. And this can be expressed differently for different types of positions. Are you publishing enough? And in the right places? Are you attracting enough students? Are you attracting the best students? Is your work of value to your stakeholders, to your institution, and to your profession? And the second, likewise, leads into the third. Are you satisfied in your work? Do you enjoy what you're doing and how you're doing it? Do you want to come to work most mornings? Or would you really be happier if a comet hit the building and completely destroyed it? You'll notice that getting money and grants is conspicuously absent. It's not that being an effective grant writer is not important, because it really is. It's because I think if you have these three things going for you, grants are not going to be an issue. I know plenty of examples of people who are swimming in grant funds and are neither happy, nor in some cases are they particularly well respected. At the risk of perfectly fitting the stereotype of the arrogant Cornellian, I have to tell you where I am now in my career, but only because it might make my advice a little more credible when we consider from where I started. Okay? So bear with me. I'm a faculty member at Cornell University. I've published umpteen papers in the top journals of my profession. I'm pretty good at scrounging up grant funds. I've received national awards for my research. And I'm very honored to be a fellow of the American Phytopathological Society. And as I said before, I'm the internal communications officer for APS. Now, no one is more surprised at any of this success than me. In fact, I think it's quite remarkable that I got to this point at all. I never took myself that seriously, but I did take my work seriously. So I have spent a considerable amount of time lately trying to understand how this all happened. What did I do that really paid off? And can I teach that to someone else? As I said, this is all the more surprising to me when I reflect on where I started from. I began as a lowly graduate student in a very small department at a hinterland university, the University of New Hampshire. My major professor was a gifted and inspiring mentor, but he was also relatively unknown at the time. I couldn't get a real job when I graduated, so I went after the only job I could find with a vengeance, and I landed a postdoc at Cornell. I'm now in the 28th year of a 2-year postdoc. I eventually became very good at getting grant funds to support myself, as well as funding grad students, postdocs, and visiting scientists who wanted to work with me. So you might assume that the key to my success was the ability to attract funding, but that's wrong. The funding was more an effect than a cause. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the funding was not really the main reason I was able to succeed. It was a symptom, but it was not the root cause of success. There was something much more fundamental at work. The question is, why was I effective at getting funding? And the more I looked around me at people who were successful and happy in their profession, the more I realized they had some common traits. Forgive me if this seems rather simplistic, because it's not my intent to trivialize this subject. These are the key strategies that have guided me through a career and continue to do so. They may strike you as rather obvious. I don't deny that they are, but there's a huge difference between acknowledging that something is self-evident and making a conscious decision that you, personally, will act upon the belief until it becomes a part of your nature. I'll go through these quickly and then come back to more specific examples of their application in a few minutes. So first, you must play well, to the best of your ability, with a focus on professional excellence. Remember, this is a strategic issue, and the very selection of problems that you choose to solve must be aligned with a strategy. You need to continually ask yourself, why am I doing this? To what end? Is this the problem that cries for a solution? Who will care if I solve this problem? And once those decisions are made, how do I solve the problem with a focus on doing so with both the substance and the spirit of excellence? That's what I mean by playing well. Next, you must play fairly in all things and at all times, no matter how you were treated. You don't cut corners, you don't bend rules, and you do not exploit other people. Lastly, you play hard. You make sure that you become well known as a person who does more than the minimum required. In groups, you make sure that no one questions your commitment to the success of the team. You work harder, perhaps, than anyone expects. I think we've given strategic planning a bad name at universities and research institutes. We often associate strategic planning with long-winded and seemingly never-ending discussions, but it doesn't need to be that way. A strategic plan is great, but it is only useful if it reconciles and aligns your principles to your practices. If you say something is important to you, and that it's a strategic goal, then your actions should reflect that goal. If not, you need to reconsider your actions. But strategic plans do not need to be windy, obtuse documents. Mine was extremely simple. Play well, play fair, play hard. The rest is detail. The goals and objectives of the best strategic plans I've ever seen fit on one page. But here's an important point that's often overlooked. Your personal strategic plan should be complementary to the plans of your department, your institution, or the hierarchy of wherever you find yourself employed. Strategy is great, but without action it is absolutely useless. And so I want to discuss the tactics that worked for me. Again, many of these were complementary or interdependent. I'll go through them fast and come back to each one later. First, I made a decision to be fully engaged in the discipline of plant pathology. That means I was a good citizen of my department. I presented seminars, and I made it a point to attend those presented by others. I joined the American Phytopathological Society. I attended their meetings every year. I presented something at every meeting. I published my papers in APS journals. That leads straight into tactic number 2. Develop and sustain an effective professional network. For most people, this all starts with getting out on the national and international stage. That gets you and your work noticed. And it leads straight to tactic number 3. Seek and accept opportunities. Scientific societies run on volunteers, and the professional connections you make in service to the discipline, in reviewing manuscripts, editing journals and books, committee work, and organizing the society, that will open doors for you for the rest of your career. So, lastly, be generous with your time and spend it well on your discipline and on your colleagues. When I did this, it came back to me several-fold in the form of contacts, a professional network, and long-lasting and very productive collaborative relationships. So now, let's take a closer look at what I mean by being engaged in the discipline. Now, there are times when you'll need to stay at your desk and close the office door and hide to finish a particular time-sensitive task. But that's going to professionally cripple you if you do it day after day after day. If you're watching this, you're probably already a member of APS. What I cannot do for you, and what you must do for yourself, is be an active and engaged member of that society. This is possibly the most direct route to developing a network. In fact, I'd say it is the critical first step. Once you are a member, find a useful and productive means to volunteer within the society. This can provide even more opportunities to develop your network. Next, you really should be publishing your work in the best journals within your discipline and professional society, without regard to their impact factor. I know all of the reasons why impact factors are thought to be important, but they are professionally irrelevant within any particular discipline. I've never suffered professionally by refusing to chase them. Another means of engagement is to nominate deserving colleagues for awards. This is not limited to members of your own department. The key attribute is whether they are deserving candidates for an award. Another means of engagement is to serve on grant review panels. You can do this many times by simply contacting the agency and volunteering your name as a possible panel member. It's that easy. They are always happy to find reviewers that are both highly qualified and willing to serve. The benefit to you, of course, is that reviewing makes you a better grant writer. The same goes for reviewing manuscripts. Contact the journals and ask to be added to their reviewer database. Again, this is connected to networking and the next rung on the professional ladder, editorial responsibilities at the journal. At this point, I've referred several times now to networking. As an early career professional, what you really need to focus on is developing what I've termed an effective network. An effective professional network is not just making acquaintances and contacts. It's more dynamic, and most importantly, it's a two-way street. It requires a sustained effort on your part and an attitude that you are perfectly okay with giving more than you receive. I know that sounds like a bad bargain, but it's absolutely necessary if you want someone else to take a chance on you. And in the long run, when people see that quality in you, they very often do precisely the same thing in the longer-term professional relationships that develop. So, it might sound counterproductive. In my experience, it is not. Lastly, don't restrict your networking efforts to the stars of your discipline. Look up, but also look down, and look beside you. Remember, you're looking for people who can help you, but also for people who want and need your help. An effective professional network can include the person in the office next door. It can include both senior and junior scientists, graduate students, and undergraduates. You should be thinking about the possibilities of working at other institutions, and also being a host for visiting scholars of all types, including government, university, and industrial scientists, and even those in private practice, such as consultants. By now, I hope you're beginning to see how all of these tactics are intensely interdependent. And so it goes for the next tactic. to seek and accept opportunities. Don't think of this as additional work or a burden that must be borne. It's to your benefit to be perceived as a good citizen of the discipline. In the end, what will determine whether the advice I'm dispensing does any real and permanent good is a long-term commitment on your part, the maintenance of a positive attitude towards developing your career, and a willingness to take some chances. Keep in mind that much of what you're being asked to do is going to seem like loss, but it will produce inevitably gains, and perhaps in ways that you never expected. The last tactic I want to mention is being generous with your time. Again, this is in direct alignment with a personal strategic plan of playing fairly, but the interdependence of all of these factors also means it has to do with playing the game well. It has much to do with excellence. Helping people is the essence of mentoring, and learning to be an effective mentor is a critical skill that all early career scientists need to develop. I'm not talking about an open-ended and limitless demand that others can place on you. But if you can focus on the real need, keeping in mind that the real need may not be what they're asking for, then it's been my experience that the time you donate to others is generally not wasted. And if we can return for a moment to our definition of professional success, which is really the topic of the day, then helping others is one of the reasons I like going to work in the morning, rather than sit around and pray for the arrival of the comet. So let's just wrap this up by saying I've always found this to be a productive part of my professional work, but that you should not try to decide who you should help based upon any probability of benefit to yourself. Just be helpful when you can, and be secure in the knowledge that it will eventually benefit you and nearly everybody around you. If you require more than the opinion of a plant pathologist in order to take this advice seriously, consider the research of the organizational psychologist Adam Grant. Contrary to the stereotype of the driven or even ruthless behavior thought to typify success in business, Grant documented that success in the business world is highly dependent upon how helpful you are towards your colleagues. Of course, this idea is hardly original, nor is it the first time it has appeared in a best-selling book. In fact, it's a common value in all world cultures and religions. This isn't a belief or value that you need to leave outside the door when you arrive at work. In my experience, it's essential both to the success of individuals and the organizations they inhabit. The critical component here is initiative and sustained effort on your part. That's not to say that help from your administration in the form of targeted funding or extra mentoring would not be helpful. My point is, there's very little to be gained by sitting around and waiting for funding to rain out of the sky on you, or for the magic mentor to appear. That's not the way it worked in my case. What's required is commitment and action on your part. So, you can consider this as your homework. I want you to begin that process of becoming more engaged in your profession. You need to pursue answers to questions about advanced training or opportunities to work with international partners or to host them at your institution. At the end of the day, it's you. You need to pursue these opportunities and find other opportunities yourself. An important part of engagement and a critical part of networking is to get your work out there in front of an audience and keep it there. To do this, you need to become visible on the national and international stage. That means not just attending meetings, but fully participating. But this activity on the international stage is built upon and amplified by your more local activity. Look for opportunities to present seminars in your department and at other institutions. Find out what your peers in the department are up to. You shouldn't have to go to an international conference to find out what the person down the hall is doing. An opportunity that comes up every year is the annual meeting of APS. In 2013, we'll meet in Austin, Texas. APS is the most dynamic plant pathology society in the world, and despite its name, it's truly an international society, with about 35% of its members living outside the United States. If you're planning a career in any aspect of plant pathology, this is where you belong. While you are at these meetings, you should be prepared to discuss the possibility of scientific exchanges with U.S. and non-U.S. partners. So look for opportunities to introduce that topic into discussions when you meet someone who seems to have a mutual interest. It's been my experience that you can often get a fast start in building long-lasting professional relationships by focusing on the foundational levels of the profession, by offering to host students and postdocs. I think if you do this, and do it well, then the big fish follow, and eventually a surprising number of these small fish that you helped in the past become established scientists someday, and perhaps lifelong colleagues and collaborators. You should also be thinking about opportunities to work in other labs, especially when you have a skill that they need. In almost all cases, the principal hurdle will be funds to pay salary and travel. So if you have your own funds, you should introduce that information into the conversation at an early stage, and this will open up a lot more opportunities for collaboration. If you are from the US, when you are dealing with international students and postdocs from certain cultures, you need to be sensitive to some prevalent myths about working in the US. Despite the fact that they may have demonstrated proficiency in English on standardized tests, many of these potential collaborators may need to be reassured that speaking English with an accent, or occasionally having to search for the right word, is not an insurmountable problem. They need to know that Americans will be amazed and pleased and often in awe of the fact that they speak English so well, or perhaps that they speak any English at all, and that in reality Americans are much more likely to feel embarrassed or guilty because most of us know only one language. And then there are the myths that many Americans harbor about working overseas. For example, my work takes me to Norway twice a year, and I can't count the number of times I've had to dispel these myths when talking to early career professionals, that Norway is dark and cold and frozen, and they work in igloos, and nobody speaks English. Granted, there are less than 5 million Norwegians, so perhaps there just aren't enough Norwegians to spread the good news about Norway. But the truth is they have a wonderful climate for much of the year. It's a country of great natural beauty. The people not only learn English from an early age, but they speak it fluently. They're very friendly. And lastly, they have excellent facilities. They're not all out there working on snow molds underneath their igloos. Here's another way in which to demonstrate initiative. In my introductory remarks, I downplayed the causative role of grants in professional success. That doesn't mean it's unimportant to develop this skill. It is important. I think one of the best opportunities for anyone, from graduate students on up, are grant writing workshops. One of these is conducted by USDA in Washington, D.C. every year. I attended one of these. They are inexpensive, very well organized, expertly taught, and absolutely comprehensive in scope with respect to USDA programs. Much of what you'll learn there transcends sponsors and international borders, and it applies to all grant proposals. In our department at Cornell, we've actually started sending many of our PhD students to these workshops as part of their graduate training. There are similar training opportunities for any number of major grant agencies. But you can also invite the program leaders from any of these agencies to speak at your institution to discuss what the program sees as an ideal proposal. Most are quite willing to do so because in the long run, it makes their job easier and more enjoyable. They really don't like receiving proposals that they have to read but can't possibly fund. I've intentionally left one of the most important aspects of your professional training for last, because this part is actually a lot of fun. We want everyone to become better at communicating science, not just to other scientists, but to anyone, anywhere. This is a major focus within a number of scientific societies in the US, and for good reasons. One of the leaders in this area is the Center for Communicating Science that was started by the actor Alda. It's located at Stony Brook University, which is near New York City, and it's part of the State University system of New York. At the conclusion of this presentation, I'll provide a link to a 32-minute video by Alda in which he talks about science communication. It's quite a story, and he does not use a single PowerPoint slide. Back in August of 2012, we brought 2 faculty from the Communicating Science workshop to talk to the APS membership at our annual meeting in Providence. I've actually gone through one of the training sessions, and what I want to close with are a few short video clips showing some of the participants from APS as well as some of the other sessions. So here's an early career scientist who's about to be put on the spot by Alda and is being forced to explain to a general audience what she does for a living. It's divided into 2 parts, before the workshop and after the workshop. She's actually an environmental chemistry student, but just watch and think about how this might apply to you. To start the video, just move your cursor over the image and the control bar will appear immediately below the image. Click once on the arrow on the left side of the control bar and the video clip will start.
And they're basically a plasticizer. So what that means is that you can add these compounds to a hard plastic like PVC pipe. PVC is polyvinyl chloride, which is their main application. So if you added that hard plastic, it then enables it to be more pliable, and it can then be turned into a variety of products that we use in our everyday life. Examples include baby toys, IV bags, food packaging. It can also be added as an additive to stuff like household cleaners, pesticides, fingernail polish.
This is something that you care about, and you care about it in a personal way, I take it, otherwise you wouldn't be working on it. So really let that come out.
If all you can think back to when you were a baby, your favorite baby toy, chances are it's plastic or some sort of plastic. And as you can all imagine, a little 3-year-old or a little 2-year-old running around with the toy.
Make it more personal. Same idea, same idea. How could you make that more personal?
If you had a baby and you...
Why us? Why not you?
Okay, I have a baby at home. And he has tons and tons of toys, and all of them are plastic. And in this plastic, a lot of times, is a compound called phthalate diesters. And these are plasticizers that make this toy into the little bulldozer or whatever it is that my son wants it to be. And when he sticks that bulldozer or that squishy toy into his mouth, these phthalates can move out of that squishy toy and into his mouth. In the same way, these phthalates are used to make all kinds of products that we use every day. And in the same way, they move out of that product and into us, into our toilets, our showers, and they move through the sewage system and into the marine environment, and that's where I come in.
One of the training methods employed in the Communicating Science workshops is improvisation. Most of us associate this with stand-up comedy, but it's also a method that's very useful in training yourself to connect with an audience and tell a story, which is really the essence of communicating the story of our science. In this case, we were given nothing but a blank piece of paper and were asked to describe our favorite work picture. This is Sally Miller, a plant pathologist at Ohio State University who frequently works in developing countries, talking about her favorite picture in front of about 1,500 plant pathologists at the APS meeting in Providence. Start this video as before by moving your cursor over the image and then clicking once on the arrow on the left side of the control bar that will appear immediately beneath the image.
This is my favorite work picture. I took this a couple years ago in Jessore, Bangladesh. See, here's the farmer. It's a young man, a young farmer, and he's standing in front of his house. And I was in Jessore because for a long time I've been working in Bangladesh as a consultant, really, on integrated pest management and vegetable crops. And you all know what integrated pest management is about. And what we're supposed to be doing in integrated pest management is reducing or eliminating the use of unnecessary chemicals and helping farmers to produce healthy and abundant food. So what we're often doing is not just reducing pesticide use, but helping these farmers find solutions to problems they couldn't control by any means. And so one day when we were leaving one of our field trials in Jessore, this young man came running up to the car and he wanted to stop us and he wanted us to see something. And he said, please come out, of course through our interpreter. He said, please come out and look. And he said, this is my house. And he said, because I learned about the things that you were teaching us to control those insect pests and diseases that were killing the vegetable crops, I could make enough money to build this house for my family. And so, although I love my real job of working with vegetable growers in the state of Ohio, I don't think I have that kind of impact that this project had and continues to have, so that's why it's my favorite picture.
Now, I suspect some of you are thinking, I could never do that. But what we saw demonstrated time and time again in the workshop was that just about anybody, no matter how nervous or shy they might feel, has the ability within them to tell a compelling, informative, and very effective story. This poor woman was so quiet and shy and nervous that the people running the workshop thought she might actually cry on stage. But by the end of her 2-minute presentation, she actually had people in the audience crying. So just watch. As before, move the cursor over the image and click once on the arrow on the left of the control bar to play the clip.
And I'm a graduate student in the neuroscience program. And I can still remember the first time I really got interested in neuroscience. I started off as a medical student in India, and it was towards the end of this course where we had to dissect the entire human body, and they had reserved the brain for the end. And I can still remember holding the brain in my hands. And I was looking at it, and I was like, this is where we keep ourselves. This is where everything we do, everything we feel, every emotion, everything comes from this tiny little organ, which is surprisingly small when you look at it. It's not as big as you imagine it to be. And ultimately, what is the brain? It's just a collection of cells, neurons and glia, and they're just constantly talking to each other, they're communicating to each other, they're sending out these processes that mix and intertwine and form these really complicated webs that just control everything we do. And that got me thinking, how do these webs and networks form? Before we're born, when the first brain cells develop, how do they know who to contact, which brain cell they need to talk to, which process they need to grow? How do they really know that? And that's what I really want to find out. Is it something that's programmed in each nerve cell that it knows where to go? Or is it something in the environment that's telling it where to go? And that's the kind of research I'm really interested in doing, because I have grown these neurons in like a dish of media. And even there, in that artificial environment, they still put out these processes. They still make connections. They reach out to each other. And to me, that's the essence of human behavior. Like, we reach out to each other. We make connections. And that's what helps us function as society, like this huge living organism that we call society. So I really want to know how it develops. Thanks.
Now, Alan Alda is a tough act to follow, and that's why I've left his bit for last. So for now, I'll stop talking. I hope you found something useful in this presentation, and that you will in the others in this series as they become available. Alan Alda is passionate about the need to communicate science more effectively. He's a great speaker. He has a great story to tell, and he does so without a single PowerPoint slide. Click on the link below. It will take you to the video on YouTube. He'll make you laugh, but most importantly, he's going to tell you how to have a simple conversation about science.